What does it look like when the worlds of music and social justice intersect? That's the question that I look at on this podcast. It's called It's Giving, and it's hosted by me, Ingela Travers-Hayward. This week, it's giving Fat Tony, also known by his real name of Anthony Obi. Tony was great to talk to because so much of the work he does is rooted in place and helping people through these really horrible natural disasters. His first ever benefit concert when he was a kid, he threw in his hometown of Houston, Texas, when all of these people who were displaced because of Hurricane Katrina from Louisiana came over to Texas. And so he thought, you know what, let's put on a concert, and raised a bunch of funds to help them. Fast forward to today, last year's really awful fires that blew through LA, not only was Tony personally affected by them, but when it all started to happen, he thought, okay, what do I need to do? And he joined this huge benefit concert that ended up raising a lot of money for the people who were also directly impacted by that. So Tony's really someone who, as you'll hear in this conversation, cares deeply about the people around him and wants to make sure that they're taken care of, even when he's going through something really insane all on his own. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and click that follow button, that subscribe button, and go back and listen to the archives. There are a whole bunch of artists who have sat down and talked to me about the things that they care just as deeply about as Tony does about where he's from. So with that, here's Tony, and have a good week. Okay, Tony, well, thank you so much for talking to me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. What's happening, y'all?
So this is a podcast that, looks at music and how it incorporates, there's so many different words at this point: activism, advocacy, organizing, all of that, how musicians incorporate that into what they do. But where I usually like to start off is a less sort of personal example, and more so, for you, when you think of a musician that uses their platform, their career, to bring awareness to things that are important, is there an artist that you think of either historically or current day, or someone that really sort of embodies, let's use this power for good?
The first artist or group that comes to mind is Goody Mob. They're a rap group from Atlanta, part of Dungeon Family. I was actually re-listening to their first two albums recently, which I've loved my whole life. And their brand of protest music kind of really revolved around I associated with the Gen X urge for conspiracy theories, peeking behind the curtain, finding out about COINTELPRO, finding out that some aspects of history and our nation may have been fabricated or altered from what they truly were, usually to cover up, some type of atrocity. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Absolutely.
They come to mind first because they're someone who, granted, I got into them 10 years after their first album came out. Their first album came out in 95. I got into them when I was in high school in the 2000s. But rather than point me towards a political affiliation, they just got, they just made you curious. They made you want to question things around you. And they did it in a way that was coming from this place of spirituality and brotherhood and family and very deeply soulful musicality too. I would liken it to they're some Pan-African Atlanta rappers rapping over music that Curtis Mayfield may have wrote a song to back in the day. You know what I mean?
You actually, it's really interesting you mentioned that, because I realized I've never asked a musician this sort of from the lens of you as a listener. Do you feel like throughout your life as you've listened to music that you've learned a lot just through the lyrics that musicians are infusing in what they're rapping about or what they're singing about? Have you
1,000,000%?
Yeah.
I mean, I've learned so much about how other regions of America function, how they talk to each other, their different cultures. I've learned a lot of that from regional rap music, regional dance music. Learned a lot about the Bay Area at first from punk music, Green Day and Lookout Records and Jawbreaker and all that stuff. So absolutely, music has been been like a path for me to learn about the world. I come from a family where I'm a first gen person. My dad's Nigerian, my mom's American. I was born and raised in Houston, Texas. I had a tight knit family living with my mom, dad, and my brother, who's nonverbal and has autism, and my grandmother, who is my mom's mom. We were in like a tight knit household, and I felt like a lot of my upbringing, I was kind of quiet or like shy until my world was blown apart by music. Music was my way to socialize and meet people and like learn about the world, IRL and on the internet. I like really credit the love of music, which led me to organizing shows when I was a teenager, like punk shows, ska shows, indie shows, stuff where I would bring out tons of kids in like Houston. And that's really how I started to make a lot of friends in my life. So yes, I owe music everything in my brain.
Well, and then, so, I mean, that leads directly into when it comes to you as the musician and you're starting, what kinds of things from your own life, what was important for you to infuse in your own music? Or were you sort of like, I want to talk about anything else? Or were there things that you personally, now that you had the ability to, wanted to bring awareness to?
I wanted to reference my hometown as much as possible. I'm from Houston, Texas, and I feel like throughout any creative thing that I've done, there has been elements of like Texas culture, references to places, people, neighborhoods in Houston, in Austin, mainly focus on like Houston, but I really try to bring the entire Texan spirit to like what I do. So there are mentions of like Austin, San Antonio, and other great cities in my wonderful home state. But yeah, I absolutely wanted to make it a bit of an autobiographical thing, even though I was always into storytelling in my music too. There's like tons of songs I made that are about characters that have nothing to do with me, but even those characters might make reference to something from Houston or from Texas or some element of my personal life,
Yeah, it's interesting, as I've started to do this podcast, and it's been 3 or 4 months or so, and so I've heard a lot of different stories. But what I've sort of had my mind expanded on is like raising awareness. It's not just about politics. It's not just about the atrocities that are going on in the world. I think it's also raising awareness about place, and helping educate people on what it's like to come to that place, from that place, because I think especially in the time that we're living now, there's so many preconceived notions about, especially Texas, and so I think these musicians like yourself that talk about where you're from, I think that can really help educate people in this really important way.
Totally. And I think it just shows folks that things are more well-rounded out there than they might picture through media. Like, I can imagine someone who is not a Texan who maybe first came to my music in like the early 2010s or something, and I'm maybe one of like the first Texas artists they ever fucked with. They might be coming off, the media speculation around George W. Bush and like other elements of like Texas culture that like seeped into the mainstream culture that kind of, sometimes puts us in like a box. It just makes us like a walking stereotype. And as you well know, if you can Google, Houston's one of the most, if not the most diverse city in all of the United States. There are a lot more elements to us than people think. And I also wanted to like touch on like something else that you reminded me of when I was thinking about being a kid, like putting on shows. I was going through my old inbox recently, and I came across my emails to this venue called Super Happy Funland, where I used to book tons of shows as like a kid. And I remembered that I put on a benefit show for Hurricane Katrina, because during that time, tons of people from Louisiana were moving to Houston after the hurricane. And, it's just interesting to think that one of the first public shows that I put on, maybe one of the first 5 or 10 shows I ever put on, was strictly a benefit. And I also thought about how my musical homes, whether it's like punk music or rap music or even dance music, it's inherently political. You know, whether it's like in the music itself or it's people tabling at a show with like zines and like pamphlets, you know, that's a culture that permeates through all the genres of music that I feel most at home in. So I was kind of bred to be someone to talk to you today.
Well, it's interesting that one of your first shows is a benefit concert because, and especially as a young musician, benefit shows are not easy to put together, and so what made you want to do that? Because I think not everyone has the drive to. So I'm curious, do you remember back in that time what sort of made you think, okay, this is something that's really important to me or important that I do?
It was right at my doorstep because like being in like Houston, we have hurricanes all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we have really awful ones that devastate and ruin property and take lives away. So it was a type of natural disaster that I was familiar with, but I had never seen the level of destruction that they went through there, you know? And I was in high school during that time. So many of the public schools were getting tons of new students coming from there. Like, I don't know the number, if it's hundreds of thousands, maybe millions. It's probably millions of people came from Louisiana who were displaced by Hurricane Katrina, and most of them came to Houston, Texas.
Yeah.
So I was interacting with these people and like meeting kids who literally had their whole lives ripped away from them. And in my culture of, DIY music and underground music, you do benefit shows when people in your community need help. And that's what urged me to do it, to be honest.
It's just a
like
no-brainer.
The right thing to do.
Yeah.
It felt like the right thing to do, And also, like, when I was putting on shows, I'm like a teenager, so I'm not, like, really trying to run a business. Like, I didn't, if I made profit from, like, shows, I took my friends to Wendy's, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I was just really proud. And, like, at the time, that was the show that had made the most money from, like, door sales and, like, ticket sales. So
do you
felt
remember,
very, very good.
Do you remember what you did with the proceeds? Like if it helped a specific group of people or anything like that?
I remember I gave it to like the Red Cross because that's kind of all I knew about. That's probably like the most mainstream thing ever. But I think now I would probably give it to maybe a more local organization.
Yeah.
Like when COVID kicked off and we were first entering lockdown, I did a live stream concert. I was living in Brooklyn at the time, and all the money from that was to benefit the Houston Food Bank.
Okay.
And like that's kind of more in the direction that if I do a benefit, I want to take in this part of my life, like really make it more local and like regional focus rather than a national entity where I might not be totally sure where that money's going through their pipeline.
Yeah. Well, and just not to make this about me, but yeah, as someone who runs a very small nonprofit, let me tell you, like when someone cares about what you're doing, we are not someone that has this massive infrastructure or barely any infrastructure, and so it just, I think, look, if you're driven to donate funds, there's no bad place to do it, but donating local, I highly support that strategy because you see the money go so much further, but it's so, if it's okay, I kind of want to pivot to, I guess you could say another weather related thing that happened to you in your life. And I'm wondering and I have a question that relates to it, but can you talk a little bit about what happened during the LA fires to you, because you're based in LA now? Can you sort of give me a little context on what that experience was like?
Sure. So from my personal experience, I had a house fire when I was a kid. I had a house fire when I was 11 years old, right before Christmas, and my family lost not everything, but lost maybe half of everything, and had to move away for like a year or so till we rebuilt our house, luckily. So I was already familiar with like the devastation fire can bring and the feeling of like starting over, right? And I also was aware that there's a wildfire season here, but in recent years, it's mostly affected the West Side as far as like the most damage. And the Palisades fire happened before the Eden fire in Altadena. So my mindset was, we are used to how devastating wildfires can get in California. The Palisades are already on fire. We're probably springing into action and going to double down on protecting the rest of the city. and I got a notice from the energy company that they might shut off the power because of the high wind damage. It's like these crazy Santa Ana winds, or what they call them, that like lead to some of this fire shit. You know what I mean? So I planned to just stay at my girlfriend's house for that night, and I went home after work. I like went to work. I went to the gym. I got home. I'm gonna shower and like pack up stuff, and the canyon had just caught on fire. Like as I pull into my driveway, my neighbor walks over and is like, "Hey, the canyon just caught fire. You should probably evacuate." Because also we were not in like a mandatory evacuation zone. I was choosing to just go stay with my partner. Most of my neighbors were just gonna like chill out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I like pull into my driveway. The fire just started. I go inside. I take a shower and I pack like an overnight bag because I'm thinking that I'm just going to, come like back in like a day or two. By the time that I got back to my car, it's like 20 minutes or so, the sky was totally burning red. Like the entire sky was just bright red. It looked so crazy. I like took a picture of it too. I'd never seen nothing like it. And at that point, I'm like hightailing it out of there, and I'm seeing all the fire trucks going towards the canyon. So I'm also thinking like, all right, it's on fire. Fire trucks are here. We're kind of prepared. People are getting out the way. People are starting to leave their homes. We're thinking it's going to be just fine. But the fire was so out of control, they could not contain it. It was nothing like we could have ever imagined. And my whole side, which was east of Lake, or maybe west of Lake, either or, it was the one that wasn't on fucking fire. And like then by the next morning, the whole thing burned down.
My God.
So it was just like it like felt like it felt when I was a kid and I lost my home to fire, but this time I'm the adult and I'm the one that has to take care of everything. And, this was a home where I had just moved in there like a year prior and was really trying to make it like a forever home type thing. So it was devastating, but we move on, you dig?
Yeah. And I think, the reason why I bring this all up is because I was really curious. And, the story you told about what you did with the benefit concert to help the people affected by the hurricane, I'm curious if music and musicians in Los Angeles in that time sort of rallied around to help other people in the way they did back when you were younger. Did you see the music community? How did that work?
I played a benefit at the Hollywood Palladium with like Phineas and Haley Williams and Jenny Lewis and tons of ill people. And that happened like a week after, maybe 2 weeks after. It was like so soon. It was like definitely within the first month of it happening. So I feel like from my vantage point, all of LA rallied together in every way possible, whether you're in the music community or not. I saw people spring to action the morning after the fire happened instantly. I think I got booked to play that benefit like 2 days after the fire, straight up. So I definitely think that we as a community were super prepped for it and like ready to help each other and like support each other and get our lives back.
It really is incredible that these types of concerts were happening so much, in the 60s and 70s. And I think it's still really incredible. It's also bittersweet in this strange way of like musicians still are the ones that come and stand up and help raise tons of money to help people in the way that sometimes like the government is not able to or doesn't. I think a lot about with our nonprofit, it's like musicians help us because there are less and less grants now, and I think it's just this really interesting way to look at it where musicians are almost sort of the safety net, I think, even still to this day, when maybe the government won't take care. Exactly.
We are for the people. We are of the people. Like people in music, you are constantly in collaboration with others, whether it's me as an A&R and I'm collaborating with my colleagues, looking at artists and like finding ways to like shepherd their vision, you know what I mean? Or I'm collaborating with with a drummer or a guitarist or a producer in like studio making music, or I'm on like tour and I'm collaborating with the guy that's driving the van, and then the guy that booked the show, and then the person taking tickets at the door, and then the sound person. Like, we are constantly working in partnership with other human beings in every aspect of music, whether it's a hobby or it's professional or it's local or it's national or it's global or whatever. And I think we have an understanding of empathy more often than not.
Yeah. And I think, one of the first reasons why I wanted to talk to you is because I also saw that you were playing benefit shows during the primaries for the LA mayoral election. And I'm just curious what that was like. Is when you're raising awareness and funds for something political, what is that environment like right now? Is it less contentious than when you play a benefit concert for something like supporting people who are affected by the fires? Or, yeah, what's that environment like when you're in that world?
That's a great question, because I had a few different experiences.
Yeah.
Like, I performed at an event for Ray, I DJ'd an event for Nithya, and then I DJ'd a DSA watch party the night of the election. And I did all of those events, even though some of those might have some separations between them, because my overall goal was to support my people and my community. And I know that most, if not all, of the values that I share are spread amongst those three organizations if they're not contained in like each of them. And I feel like if I can bring some sort of awareness to people that have eyes on me to any of these folks, then I'm serving my community properly. And I feel like the vibe at each of those events was very optimistic, except for the watch night party, because the watch night party, Spencer Pratt was like blowing Nithya out the water, and like people were just looking like, here we go again, we're screwed. But luckily Nithya bounced back. That was awesome. And that was also a great moment for everyone to get educated about how elections typically happen in California and in LA, with the mail-in votes being so heavily weighed. But I would say that overall, the vibe, even the watch party night, like, people weren't visibly super bummed. It was more like, all right, what do we do next? How do we make our next plans? How do we come up with the next strategy? How do we stay hopeful? I feel like because of the New York mayor, there's been a lot of enthusiasm amongst people I know who are involved in organizing and activism and politics here in Los Angeles, really wanting to see us have a moment where we can have a democratic socialist running shit here and really speaking up for people. And there's been a big movement of that, obviously, over the past decade here in Los Angeles. The LA DSA organization has been going very strong for a long time. But I think we're in a moment now where we're like, we live in hell. There's suffering all around us, and we're starting to see some like wins across the coast. How can we make that happen for our people here?
Someone in Colorado, I don't know what race it was, but it was a DSA member that just won a couple days ago or last night. So it's like, I'm crossing my fingers for you guys. Yeah, that's coming west and more west and more west and more west. But as an artist, when it comes to politics specifically, or actually, any kind of issue that you want to take up for or you want to talk about, is there ever any hesitation where you try and square away, okay, I really care deeply about this, but I'm also a working musician and have to think about my career? Do those two things ever come into play together, or is that not something that you've ever felt like you've had to consider?
No.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
No,
yeah.
I'm not good at like lying or faking how I feel about something. And I don't come into any of my opinions from a place of like hate or anger or, it's like all meant in the spirit of like love and uplifting people and keeping people safe and letting people walk the path of like happiness as often as they can in their life. So I feel very comfortable to speak my mind about any opinion I have. And if it's something I'm not educated on, then I won't speak about it. But if I feel like I've looked into it, I've formed an opinion, I'm feeling passionate about it, you're damn right I want to talk about it, especially if I have a platform. That's the whole point.
Do you feel like that stance is the more common one among musicians these days? Or do you feel like you had without hesitation saying no? Do you think that other people do have more hesitation?
I think I would say most, I don't know. I like kind of want to say half or most
Yeah.
people probably have a hesitation
Yeah.
because I think we like live in a world that is so we are consumed by optics and how we can appeal to people and how we're perceived by people more than ever, more than ever over the last 10 years, whether it's because of world politics or social media or whatever the fuck. And I think a lot of people are worried about losing opportunities. We're
Yeah.
also in a realm of life where like the economy is difficult and finances are tough,
Yeah.
and especially if you're a creative person, you are very concerned about losing an opportunity based on something that you've said, or and we're also, I don't know if we're still in it. I think we're kind of coming out of it, but cancel culture and like, there's like
Yep.
and like cancel culture just doesn't apply to like bigots. It can apply to anyone that has an opposing force that is loud enough to like silence them in some way. Even if being canceled doesn't really affect them much, there is still fear around that stigma. So I'd say most people are hesitant to speak too freely unless that is part of their like brand or whatever. I'm just more interested in intellectually stimulating, fun, honest, loving conversations, whether we agree or disagree. I think it's dope.
Yeah. That's great though. And yeah, it's like, I never fault anyone for whether or not they want to use their platform. I think it's a really complicated and personal choice, but yeah, I always wonder, how much of a push and pull does each artist go through when deciding, okay, yes, this just matters so much. I don't give a shit if I get, all this hatred on social media or whatever. This is important to me. Or it's like, yeah, how much goes on behind the scenes that we don't see? Because I think it is a lot of pressure, and I mean, it's just one small part of things. But yeah, like you said, in this day and age where people are so quick to pounce on someone, I think it can be hard to have a platform in that certain way.
I think it's better to be honest. Like, I always think about this story that a friend told me many, many years ago about Marcus Garvey, who is not American. I believe he's a Jamaican. He came to the U.S. because he was hearing about the Ku Klux Klan and all the awful, violent things that they were doing. And he had a meeting with them to like talk face to face and like hear what was going on. And he left that meeting obviously being like, okay, we don't see eye to eye on many things. Appreciate the conversation. I'll see y'all never. And I really appreciate that because I'm also the kind of person who is down to sit with someone who has opposing views of mine, even if they're wildly opposing, long as they're down to have a civil conversation. Because if someone is of the opposite, feeling, opinion, thought, or perspective or whatever, if they're on the opposite of however I feel, I'm curious enough as a person to want to hear them out and, not to sway me, but I want to understand, why do you feel so strongly about this thing that I think is awful?
Yeah. Yeah.
Help me understand, because at the very least I can walk away and say, okay, they have this horrible opinion and this horrible way of doing things, and I now know their reasons why, and I can now see how they were led into a life of fucking misery.
Yeah. I've always maintained, yeah, like being curious is like the best thing you can do, because otherwise it's just, I mean, you're going to live a long, horrible life, So yeah, even though you might like throughout your time talking to them think you are one of the worst people I've ever encountered, at least you're respectful enough to have that conversation, you know? So I think
Totally,
that's good.
yes.
So my last question is always the same, because I'm always selfishly really interested in how each musician sort of interprets it. For someone out there who is just like, yeah, life is abysmal right now. This is really weighing me down, but I want to try and do something that can help a little, just like some small thing that can maybe make me feel a little bit better and can try and contribute to some sort of good, right? What advice would you give someone who comes to you and is like, what do you think I should do to try and make this world a better place in some small way?
Man, something I'm really into is supporting our libraries, because
Great answer.
I'm actually low key. I'm kind of scared about literacy rates dropping, and being a literate person is so important to me because I love art, and it's the cornerstone of so much art that I love, whether it's music or film or TV or whatever the case, and if that disappears from our culture, we're really fucked. And there's going to be a lot of middling and bad art and media out there for us to consume, and it's going to drive me crazy. And I feel like the library, even if, many people see the library as like a place where like drifters hang out or elderly people hang out or whatever.
Great.
Fuck all that.
Yeah.
That is, that is great, but like, fuck the people who are like using that as a reason to not engage with the library.
Yeah.
The library is a great good for everyone that lives in the city that has one, and you should support them as much as possible, whether that's giving them money or volunteering. Just look into ways to promote people to read more in your community. That's my advice.